today I'm real excited to continue our romance series. It's called Love That Lasts. Love That Lasts. Everybody wants love. Not everyone knows how to make it last. In fact, I think everybody has experienced this feeling of love. You've felt love before. It might have been that girl in 6th grade, might have been your high school sweetheart, might have been Justin Bieber or Carrie Underwood or Betty White, depending on how old you are. All are welcomed at Captivate Church, you know what I mean? And the thing about love is it's one of the greatest feelings, that we could ever experience in the world, and yet it's a double-edged sword. Some of you know the double-edged sword that is love. In one moment, it can be the best feeling you've ever felt, and in the next moment, it can be the worst pain that you ever had. In fact, when I talk about feeling love, maybe you didn't think about 6th grade or high school or Betty White. Maybe you thought about that one time when you got your heart broken. Maybe you thought about that one season when you thought you met the one just to find out they're not really the one. Maybe you thought about a previous marriage. Maybe you thought about the marriage you're in and you're wondering why it is the way it is. Or maybe your marriage is amazing. You're like, how do we make it stay this way? Because it doesn't always last. And so I want to make it last. Either way, no matter where you're at in your romantic life, we need to talk about this, because when it comes to building a romance and building a marriage, the world's not really looking at the church anymore. They're not really looking to the people of God anymore. People aren't reading the Bible, they're watching The Bachelor. And I think that that's true because I'm not sure the world is convinced that we've got it dialed in. I'm not sure they think that we're doing any better job than they are. We've all heard the statistic that 50% of marriages end in divorce, whether you go to church or not. And so all of a sudden, what was normal out in the world is becoming normal in here. Divorce, absent marriage, loneliness, affairs. It's becoming normal, and yet how many know God did not call us to be normal? He called us to be the light of the world, to be an example to people of what love could look like. And I want that for you. I want that for us. In fact, 2 Februaries ago, we did a romance series. The last time we did it, we had 3 different couples in our church who were on the verge of divorce. They were already separated. They reconciled in that 1 month. And so we're praying this month, God, do it again. We want to see him do it again. You don't have to be another statistic. You could be on your 7th marriage. And how many know God can make this one last if we build it his way? If we do romance in his order. And that's really what I want to talk about, because God has a certain order as it relates to romance. And it's very different than the culture that we find ourselves in. How do we build a romance from the bottom up? In fact, that's what I called this message, Started from the Bottom. Started from the bottom. Now we're here. And what is here, and how do I get to a here that will last, and a here that matters and is life-giving? I want to talk about that today. I got 5 P's today. I got some points for people who take notes. Here's the first one, all right? Here's the first P. How do we build a love that's going to last? Number 1 is pursuit. Number 1 is pursuit. Real biblical romance always starts with pursuit, okay? This is, by the way, pretty much the story of the whole Bible, is that man continually runs away from God, and yet God continually runs towards man. It's pursuit. God pursues us over and over again. Why does he do that? Because he chose you. God says, you did not choose me, I chose you, John 15:16. You are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, 1 Peter 2:9. He says, before the foundation of the world, you were chosen to live a holy and blameless life, Ephesians 1:3. God chose you. Real biblical romance always starts with pursuit. Well, biblical pursuit always starts with choosing. God wants you to choose somebody. And that's the thing I love about God, is that God gives you a choice. God did not make one person for you. He's not really into arranged marriages. That's not the kind of dad that he is. He's going to let you choose. God doesn't want you to just be with somebody. He wants you to choose somebody. And so he lets you pick. And there's 2 reasons for that. Number 1, love is not love without choice. God wants you to choose somebody. And then number 2, how many know if God made one person for you, we would have messed it up by now, all right? Imagine your great-great-great-grandfather Billy. Billy's supposed to marry Tina. He don't want to marry Tina. She got messed up teeth. And so he marries Tanya. Tanya was supposed to marry Bo, but now Bo's got to settle for Cindy. And the whole thing is messed up, all right? And that's what would happen if God did like that. And so he doesn't. God lets us choose someone. Okay, the thing about that, though, is sometimes we forget that choosing someone is a daily practice. Sometimes we think that, man, we chose them way back in the day on our wedding day when we were looking really good and the dad bod didn't exist yet. It's like we chose each other. Okay, choosing someone is a daily practice. Choosing someone or choosing Jesus every day. Every day you wake up and you choose them or you choose something else. And a lot of times we choose something else. Why? Because we've been through pain and we hurt each other. I've said things to my wife I never thought I would say to her. I've said things to her she probably never thought that I would say to her. We've let each other down. We've disappointed each other, and it's painful. And here's the truth about pain. Pain kills pursuit. And it gets us to stop pursuing, to stop doing the things we did in the beginning that made it fresh and healthy and romantic, like date night and spontaneity and adventure and all that kind of stuff. It's like we stop doing that Because along the way, we're like, yeah, we don't need that anymore. Now we got bills and kids and, that'll keep us together. How many know as your problems get bigger, pursuit needs to get bigger? Your pursuit needs to grow at the same rate as your problems. Your romance needs to grow at the same rate as your responsibilities. And if not, you might lose it. You need to go back and do the things you did at the beginning. In fact, I'll say it like this. If you do at the end what you did at the beginning, there's not going to be an end. It's going to get sweeter and sweeter. And by the way, the same is true in your relationship with Jesus. I know sometimes we get rocked by Jesus. You might have gotten saved for the first time and you're like, whoa, this is amazing. Jesus, I needed this. And you get rocked by him and you're like, God, oh my God, you feel light. His burden is light. You weigh 2 pounds in the presence of God. And you're like, I just want to stay here. But then what tends to happen is over time, we start graduating in religion. And we say, hey, what's the next thing I need to do? What are the books I need to read? What are the podcasts I need to look? Tell me what to do. How do I level up as a Christian? And let's be honest, over time, it gets a little bit dead and stale, and we get over it. Because we thought romance and pursuit with Jesus was just the appetizer, when in actuality it was the appetizer, the main course, and the dessert. You don't get away from that. And sometimes we forget that. We get away from it. It gets a little bit dead. We lose the love we had at first. That's what Jesus says in Revelation 2. He looks at the church in Ephesus and he says, listen, I love all the things you do. I love your books. Podcasts are on point. But here's what I have against you. You've lost the love you had at first, right? That's the diagnosis. Here's the prescription. He says, do the deeds you did at first. Go back and do the things you did at first. They made it fresh and healthy and alive. Go back and do that. Because that's where we fell in love. That's where there was pursuit and romance. Do the deeds you did at first. Do the deed you did at first. That sounds sexual, but we're in a romance series, so whatever. It's fine. It works. And if you don't know what that looks like anymore, maybe you forgot what pursuing your significant other looks like, or you don't know what it is, go ahead and ask them. I think they'd like to tell you. I was on a plane years ago with Monica, and we were on our way to a vacation. And so I asked her, I said, hey, what are you most excited about to go on this trip? And she looked at me and said, I'm excited that on this trip, when we go on vacation, I actually get all of you. And I said, what does that mean? She said, on vacation, you actually pursue me. How many know that's not a compliment, all right? It's not, especially not with the use of the word actually, right? I said, what do you mean? Like, I pursue you, right? She's like, sometimes. And I'm like, are you doing that thing that women do where you're trying to say something without saying something? Like, I need help. My brain is small. Help, And she said, okay, well, why don't you tell me? Why don't you tell me how you've been pursuing me lately? And I'm like, how have I not been pursuing you lately? Okay. I'm like, I work a lot. I provide. I buy you shoes. Is there something else? And you got to remember, this is like first year of marriage. I need grace. I need a lot of grace. I need a lot of grace. That's what I thought. And she looked at me and she said, you need those things more than I do. I said, what do you mean? She said, as a man, it makes you feel like a man to do all those things. You need that more than I do. More than I need you to provide. I need you to be present. And she was telling me what pursuit in her life actually looked like, right? And that's what pursuit is about, by the way. It's about them. I'll say it like this. Pursuit is not about what you want. It's about what they need. I dare you to ask somebody in life. This could be your spouse. It could be your boss. It could be a friend. What does it look like to pursue you or give you what you actually need? It might be different than what you think it is. What do you actually want? What do you actually need? Again, it might be different than what you think. And don't just do something to get something out of it, because I've done that a lot of times. I've come home with like a succulent, because Monica doesn't really care about flowers, and Reese's Pieces and a card, and I'll look into her eyes and say something really deep, like, wow, your eyelashes look so full today. Something like that, And then later, like Bible study's over, and I'm like, all right, let's do the deed. You know what I mean? And it's like, and nothing happens. And so, but I did that to get something out of it. And she could tell that. In fact, I don't think that's a gift. I think it's an investment. And I'll say it like this. I think that when you give a gift while expecting a return, it's not a gift, it's an investment. And I think they can feel that. So how do you pursue to actually bless and serve somebody else? And we're not gonna pursue unless it's number 2, a priority, okay, priority. This needs to be a priority in the relationship. The romance part, not just the bills and the kids and all that stuff. When that stuff becomes more of a priority, you become roommates, not soulmates. And that's not very helpful. It's not good for you or anybody else, right? It's not good for the kids. The best gift you could actually give your kids is a passionate, affectionate relationship with your spouse. I know that in like television and movies and pop culture, kids are depicted as being gross. They're like, ew, stop, stop kissing dad. actually it's good for them. They feel security. They feel like, man, mom and dad are together. They're in unity. This is a good thing. They actually need to see that. It needs to be a priority in your life. And when I say priority, I'm not just talking about some abstract idea that you should make it important. I'm saying you should put it on your calendar. Here's 5 things, in fact, I think it would be good to put on your calendar. Number 1 is date night, okay? Date night. That you actually get out, that you actually spend time together. Because what happens is you get really busy in life, and now you're relying on what's spontaneous. And we do this with Jesus a lot too. We're just waiting for a spontaneous moment, and sometimes we don't spend any time with him. We're waiting for a cloud to open up instead of having real devotion. So actually putting it on our calendar. The cool thing about putting it on your calendar is it provides vision. If you're really busy and it's like you never get time together, at least you have something to look forward to. It's really helpful. Here's the next thing you might put on your calendar that might be weird for you. Sex, maybe put that on your calendar. Again, we've had seasons where it's like we don't have any time and we're on different schedules and all that. And so we actually get to talk about it. What I've learned about intimacy is that before you get married, the devil does everything that he can to get you to have sex. But once you get married, he does everything he can to get you to stop. Why? Because when you lose intimacy, you lose foundation, and now you're not together anymore. You're not in unity anymore. There's so many things that will get in the way. And so I've literally had seasons where I've sent a calendar invite to my wife. And some of the guys in here are sending calendar invites. Just wait till after church, all right? Calm down. Calm down. Let's move on. In fact, here's the next one. Communication, okay? Communication. I think this is what ruins marriages maybe the most, is that people don't communicate. We communicate about the big things because we can't ignore those, but it's the little resentments, it's the little fights that we just dust under the rug. I think those build over time. You start not to like somebody. You start not to feel in unity with them. And so what we've had to do is create space where we can get it out and make this an actual priority in our life, because we process things differently in our house. I'm an external processor times 10, and my wife is an internal processor. So what will happen is we'll fight about something. I'll get all of it out. She won't say much, and I'll walk away thinking I won. I'm like, yep, that's right. And in actuality, she's gonna chew on it for 2 or 3 days, and she has new thoughts and new emotions about it. And so I've had to create a space. I'm like, hey, we need to get that out. Because what the devil likes to do is he likes to send you a reminder. Remember what they did 12 weeks ago? And all of a sudden you're fighting about one thing. It has nothing to do about that thing because it's about the thing 12 weeks ago. Because you haven't gotten through that. You haven't talked about it. You haven't forgiven each other. And so what we like to do is create a space. It could be monthly, weekly, daily. If you have the time and intentionality to do that, and you're like, hey, get it out. What do we need to talk about? Let's commit to forgiving each other. So when we fight 7 weeks from now, it's not like, remember what you did 17 weeks ago? That's not healthy. So you've actually made a space to get it out. Here's the next thing. This one's really hard to make time for, but I think it's really important. Mentors. Mentors. The definition of a mentor is somebody who's out of place in life where you want to be, and now they're going to help you get there. It's really helpful to meet with somebody who's been there, done that, and they're ahead of you. And it's a place where you can go and let all the ugly out. There's men in my life that Monica can text at any time and say, Weston is acting crazy. Can you please text him? And they do. And they call and they say, hey, what's going on, man? You know, it's like we have accountability. It's helpful. You don't want to do it. Marriage is a team sport. Okay, you don't want to do it by yourself. And here's the last one. This one's really obvious. Spiritual connection. Okay, going to church, doing devotion, praying goes on your calendar. Okay, here's the next P, number 3, purpose. Purpose, having a unified purpose. Okay, I hear the word submission thrown out a lot in church. You know, that we need to learn submission. I heard, guys, I just need a wife who's gonna submit, okay? We need to understand what this word actually means, the word submission. Okay, the word submission is the joining together of the prefix sub and the word mission. I don't mean to insult your intelligence, but here's what that means. It means one person comes under somebody else's mission. The mission with which they live their life, that's what their life is. Someone comes under that. That's what submission is. And so as a leader or as a man, the first question is not will they submit, but is there something worth submitting to? Is there a mission that actually matters? Is there something that's worth giving my life to? Because let me tell you, making more money is not a mission worth submitting to. Having a bigger house or living out the American dream, it's just not a mission worth submitting to. Those things aren't bad. It's not sinful to have those things, but sometimes it is when it's the ultimate mission of your life. Because whether it's your kids or someone you're married to, these people are children of God. Need to be involved in something that is eternal. That's a mission that's going to matter in the end. In fact, I'll say it just like that. A marriage will make it to the end if it has a mission that will matter in the end. And I say that because we all are going to hit checkpoints in our life. I call them checkpoints. Some people call it midlife crisis. I call them checkpoints because I think it happens more than just at midlife. It's more than just a halftime. I think there's quarters to this thing. I think when we're 22, when we're 30, when we're 45, when we're 62, when we're 80 or 90, we stop and we look back and we wonder, what was all that for? Did that matter, all that I just did? Did that really matter? Did that have meaning? And it's a dark and eerie feeling when you look back and you're like, I'm not so sure that mattered very much. Gave all the best of my energy and my time and my life to what exactly? And I've counseled a lot of couples at the end, and they're fighting because they're looking at each other like, hey, we gave our best years to your pension and making more money. We submitted to money. And I think that's why Jesus talks about money more than anything else in the Gospels. People have often asked, why does he do that? He talks about money more than heaven, hell, and mercy combined. Why does he do that? Is it because money's so important? No, I think it's because we make money so important. And Jesus knows that. And so he speaks to that so we won't actually submit or come under that. There's actually something more purposeful in our life that we can actually give our life to. And we see this in Scripture, examples of this. In the book of Acts, there's two marriages that are very different. They have a very different set of values. The first one is in Acts chapter 5. It's Ananias and Sapphira. And they have submitted themselves to money and having more and keeping more for themselves. Okay, they don't just have their marriage not last, their lives don't last. But then you get a very different picture of a marriage in Acts chapter 18, Aquila and Priscilla. And Aquila and Priscilla are Jews that are living in Italy, and there's a new emperor, and so they kick all the Jews out. They become refugees. They move to a place called Corinth, which is in Greece, and now they're faced with having to find out, how are we going to make it? How are we going to make a new home and a new business? And it was very stressful. And in the middle of all that, they meet some guy named Paul. And Paul starts a church, and he's like, hey, can you guys help? Like, with all the extra time and like effort and like emotional energy, can you guys help? And so they're like, man, we don't really have time for that. But what'd they do? They let Paul live in their house. And they gave Paul work to do, and they gave their finances, and they gave their time. They actually taught some key leaders in the church in that chapter. And they gave their life away. And they helped build the Corinthian church, which becomes the most premier influential church perhaps in all of the New Testament. We get 2 books of the Bible, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, from them. And it's got their name on it, Aquila and Priscilla, because they gave their life to a mission greater than themselves. And I was thinking about that, by the way, this morning, and I got really emotional. It was like a puddle of tears, because I thought about the families that did that for us. We showed up to Point Loma High School 4 years ago, and we had a team of 7 people and not a lot to offer. And yet God shoulder tapped Aquila's and Priscilla's, and they gave their life. They opened up their home. I mean, I just thought about families, man. There's so many of them. The Lanes and the Cooks and the Tortolots and the Tressers and the Titanos and the Burgers. And there was just so many people that just said yes. And now we've seen 7 people turn into thousands. We've had 1,012 people give their life to Jesus, and it's got their name on it. They said, we're going to be a part of something bigger than ourselves. And that's what keeps you together. By the way, that's why we get married in front of crowds. We get married in front of crowds so that your marriage would be a witness to other people of what an actual godly marriage looks like. It'd be a testimony, not just a story. And I do that every wedding that I do. I say it is my honor, with the power vested in me by the state of California, more importantly, the Spirit of God, to pronounce you for the very first time as husband and wife. You may kiss your bride. And I always get out of the way, okay? You got to get out of the way. I don't want to be in the picture. So I'm way over here. And then they kiss. Some take a little bit of time. Some take way longer, whatever. Crazy. They've been waiting a long time. I don't know. But anyway, so then I put my hand on the groom's shoulder. And I said, help me introduce for the very first time Mr. and Mrs. Aquila and Priscilla. And they go from looking into each other's eyes to now facing the world. That's what marriage is. They're facing the world. They're facing their mission. And we send them down the path. We send them down the aisle, hoping that the aisle and the path will keep them together. Because a lot of people don't make it, and they split up, and they say, yeah, our lives went in 2 different directions. And it was the path of God that was supposed to keep them together. Because when you start to not like each other and there's pain and the path keeps you together. Keep down that aisle, man. That's where God called you to go. It's purpose that keeps you together when you do not like each other. And so what is the purpose of your life or your marriage or your relationship? And if you're figuring that out, that's a good thing, right? This moment's not like, hey, babe, what's our purpose? Like, that's not the point, right? It's not about feeling guilty. There's a lot of grace. You actually want to build up the person you're with. I'll say it like this. You'll either tear down the person you have to be with, you have to be married to, or you build up the person you get to be with and you get to be married to. And what does that take? It takes a lot of patience. That's number 4. Patience. Number 4 is patience, okay? You need a God-sized amount of patience to make a marriage last. Some of you are like, you have no idea. You don't know who I'm married to. Let's be nice, okay? We'll pray for you. But I'll talk about patience in marriage in a minute, but you actually need to be patient and practice patience before you get married. There are things that we can do in a relationship before marriage that really hurt the relationship after marriage, like living together and sleeping together. The Bible's really clear about that. Okay, there's this word called fornication in the Bible, that's sex outside of marriage. That's not in God's order. God doesn't bless that. People have asked time and time again, is that really a big deal anymore? There is no example of fornication that God honors in the whole Bible. There's no example of it. God doesn't give it as a good example. It's not used as an illustration that works ever anywhere in the Bible. It's actually used the quite opposite all through the Bible. Okay, that's very clear in Scripture, but the government's actually pretty clear about this. Okay, according to the U.S. Attorney's legal office, there is a 30% greater chance of divorce in the first 5 years of marriage if you live together before you got married. That's according to the government. That's crazy. That's pretty clear, right? But Scripture is also pretty clear about sexual temptation and what to do with it. Here's what 1 Corinthians 6:18 says. It says, flee. Flee from sexual temptation. It doesn't say to talk about it or even pray about it. It just says run away. Run away as fast as you can. Why? Okay, here's why. Every other sin a person commits is outside the body. Sexually immoral person sins against their own body. This is not God saying this person is worse spiritually. God does not rank sin like we do in church much of the time. He's saying it can just hurt really bad. It can hurt against your body. What he's saying is be nice to yourself. Be nicer to yourself. You don't want to sleep with a temptation. That could be a person, could be a cell phone, could be a computer. Anything that gives you access to this that will hurt you. In fact, I'll say it just like that. How can you flee from a temptation you're sleeping with? And that's not just people, man. That's like Wi-Fi in my bed with me. Like, that's not helpful. He's saying be nicer to yourself than that. Have some patience. You also want to have patience when you're dating someone to make sure that they're honoring God now and today. Sometimes we date people based on potential. It's called missionary dating. Have you ever heard of that? You're like, I'm going to save them. It's like only Jesus can save them. That's fine. And so we do that. We step into that. What you really want to find out is what their character is today. Are they honoring God today? And you find that out based on patterns, not potential. And I'll say just like that. You discover someone's character based on patterns, not potential. Do they have a pattern of honoring God today? Because if they don't honor God outside of marriage, why would they do it inside of marriage? And listen, that's a slippery slope. Because you think that's just sexuality and all that. It actually keeps going. It's like you get into marriage, it's like, do we even need to pray? Are you sure we need to be generous? I don't know. Are you sure we need to go to church? And listen, I've seen that. I've done over 70 weddings. And I've seen it a lot where one person's really fired up on the Lord and the other's not. And it goes back and forth, guy, girl, guy, girl. And it's like they get married and it's like they don't go to church anymore. Usually that person wins. Why? Because it's really hard to drag a fully grown adult to church every week. That gets really tiring. It gets exhausting. And so you kind of just give up on that. And it becomes really sad because we weren't patient, right? To find someone that's honoring God actually today. We want to build it in God's order. Here's how most people build a relationship. And most people in a relationship, they start with the emotional and the physical stage. That's how most people build it. Right? Physical, because I want to indulge and have fun and all that. Emotional, because that feels really good. Right? The emotional stage is fun. That's when you're on the phone for 4 hours at night, because you're like, I just want to hear you breathing. Oh, yes. It's weird, right? It's really weird. And so you start doing things that you wouldn't normally do. You listen to weird music. How many know R&B music exists for the emotional stage, all right? Alicia Keys, Whitney, Barry White. It depends how old you are. You know what I mean? Music's been making money off our emotions for a long time. Makeup songs, breakup songs, love at first sight songs, and then we try to slide God into it. All my life, I pray for someone like you. I thank God. It's like God had nothing to do with it, but that's fine. We'll just slide him in. It's the emotional stage, right? It's really fun. Here's the problem. In the emotional stage, we often make decisions we should never make. And we give things away we should never give away. And why do we do that? Because in the emotional stage, love is blind. Love is blind. You can't see the person for who they really are because you just see them for who you want to see them because they make you feel good. And in your mind, it's Hollywood and it's the Disney Channel, and that just doesn't last very long, right? It doesn't last all that long. You have these butterflies. So psychologists say that the butterfly stage can last anywhere from 6 to 18 months. That's the high end, 18 months. And then the butterflies go away. And all the married people are like, yes, that's true. They do. They go, because wouldn't it be weird if I walked in after 10 years of marriage and Monica's like, oh, he's here, you know? She doesn't do that. She doesn't do that. Today I'll get home from church and I'll walk in and she'll be like, hey, the trash is full. And I'm like, do you know what I just did all day? Just preach the gospel to all these people. She'll be like, cool, the trash is still full. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's kind of what it is. But in the emotional stage, we're not thinking about that. It feels good. There's butterflies. It's amazing. We make decisions we shouldn't make. And we get really committed. We get really involved. It kind of grabs our heart. And then what we do after that is we take it social. We introduce this person to other people. But at this point, we're not really looking for feedback. We're not really looking to see what our family or our friends think because we're all in. We've given physical things away. We have emotional connection. Right? And even when somebody tries to tell you like, hey, I don't know about him, you're like, you don't know what we have, you know, because it's emotional. And so listen, most people don't want to be the bad guy in someone else's relationship. I've done that 100 times. It doesn't work very well. Most people are conflict averse, and so they won't say anything. But they're the same people who 18 months later when it doesn't work out, they're like, I could have told you it wasn't going to work. You're like, thanks, you know, but you're like, you didn't invite it. You never invited it in. You just wanted us to meet him or her or whatever. And so after some time, you've gotten really invested. I see people get married at this point. And they move in at this point. They give things away at this point. And then people stumble on what is, I'm going to call the interpersonal state. This is when you find out who they really are. And sometimes you find out who someone really is and you're like, they're weird. You didn't know. You find out how they really vote or how they really deal with money or what they really want with kids or not or what they really, do they want to go to church or not? You find out who they really are. I've heard so many married couples say that 6 months in, 5 years in, they're like, they changed. And I'm like, no, you just didn't learn who they really were. You're too busy listening to Whitney and doing all this stuff, and it was fun, and I'm sure it was. But you stumble on who they really are, and you might not like it, it might not work, and you think, man, maybe this isn't for me. And in that, we go through pain, and we feel broken. We feel like we're kind of a mess. And it's in the middle of being a mess that we try to walk into church. And you're going to hear preachers like me and sermons like this where I talk about fornication and being pure, and it's just going to feel like a weight that's crushing you. I believe with all my heart, every time I do a romance series, there are people in our church who are waiting at home. I'll wait for the next series. This one is too painful. I don't want to hear about it. Why? Because we walk in and the spiritual is just crushing us. Like, I haven't done all that, Pastor, and it's too heavy. And we don't want to think about it, so we're like, all right, I'm going to walk away, I'm going to leave church for a season, I'm going to get right, I'm going to fix it, and then I'll come back. Listen, you stand no chance for the devil and the sexual attack that's on your life. You're not going to fix it. We come into church and God says, I want to heal you. I'm here to help you. I'm not here to crush you. I'm here to lift you. How many know we don't hold God up, God holds you up. And God holds me up. And he says, I'm going to hold you up, and I'm going to make you new. And as I do that, let's rebuild this thing together from the bottom. And when we do, let's start with what is spiritual in your life. You start with what Caleb talked about last week, the person before the partner, that God gives you identity, life, and purpose before you meet anybody. Jesus lives an abundant, free life, didn't even get married. The Father can complete you. You have a foundation. You know who you are. You put your head down and you run after God. And over some period of time, hopefully in a social setting like church, you will run into somebody. Hopefully you'll run into somebody doing the same thing. And they're running after God and you're running after God. And it's kind of interesting. You get to observe them in church and in small group and in community. And it's like, hey, they're interesting. I wonder what they're like. And if they're really interesting, then you say, hey, let's go get coffee sometime. And you take it interpersonal. You get to know who they are. You take them to coffee, $4, all right? Before you buy them a steak, learn about who they really are. And you have a conversation and it goes well. You say, hey, let's do this again. Let's have another conversation. And the next time you come, hopefully not with your pad of paper, but there's about 5 things that you need answered before you buy them a steak. And by the way, these are preferential to you. It might be how they spend money, how they vote, kids, where they want to live. I call it this, the pace at which they want to follow Jesus. The pace. Because just going to church and believing in God might be very different than you. It's the difference between someone who just bought their first Bible and somebody who's praying about being a missionary. Different pace. Want to follow Jesus. And you discover what that is. And you're in community, you have accountability, other people are speaking into it. And this person seems like a fit, you're praying about it. You've guarded your heart, but at some point, if you keep on going, you can take it emotional. And not physical yet. We got to wait for marriage. That's a typo. Anyway, you take it emotional. and you care about them in a unique way, and you pursue their heart, and you get married, and then you got physical, and it's all good. It's all good. Then you get married, and you really need patience. You really need, because every marriage will go through a season where you doubt your marriage. And you might have never thought that that was going to happen, but we've all seen marriages we thought were going to make it and they didn't. So you might think, is that me? Is that us? You start to think about your vows, for better or for worse. Sometimes it's worse. In sickness and in health, sometimes we don't look the same, okay? For richer or for poorer, they say that the number one cause of divorce in America is finances. And these things hit our life, and we lose patience, and we give up. What's the encouragement? It's one of my favorite verses in the Bible, Galatians 6:9. He says what? Don't get tired of doing what is good. Because at the right time, you're gonna reap a harvest if you don't give up, if you have patience. And a lot of people say that about their marriage. It didn't work. And God's like, that's because it was working. It didn't work. No, it's working. No, but it didn't work. No, but it's working. Keep watering it. Don't give up. Say it like this. Don't give up on the relationship before God does. Don't give up before he does. In fact, invite him into it. And that's number 5. And I'll end with this. What's going to keep us together? Presence. Your presence is great, but I'm talking about God's presence. I think it was Focus on the Family who put out a statistic that said 1 in 1,100 marriages end in divorce for people who pray together every day. Why? Because how many know it's really hard to be selfish in God's presence? It's hard to not forgive in God's presence. It's hard to think about divorce in God's presence. When I sit in his presence. So what does that mean? There needs to be a space in your relationship, romantically, in your marriage, friendship, whatever. There needs to be a space where you get into an argument or a fight or something's going wrong and you stop and you say, this isn't the place. This is not the place where we fix this and deal with this. What is the place? We need to get into his presence. That's the place where hope is found and he can heal you in your relationship. We need to get in that place. This is the place. It's God's presence. And that's what we need in our relationships. It's not a better devotional. You need to get in God's presence. And so what does that look like for you to do that day in and day out? And I pray that God would just release his presence in all your relationships, into your romantic life, no matter where you find yourself. There's a lot of people. In our church, you're all over the place romantically. You think you might be dealing with what you're dealing with and it's just you. There's a lot of people going through the same thing, no matter where you are. And I pray that wherever that is, God would release presence into that. Would you pray with me as we close? God, we just pray for that right now. Would you bring your presence close? God, thank you for pursuing us. Thank you for choosing us. Somebody needs to hear that right now. You walked in the spiritual weight. You feel like it's crushing you. And God says, no, I chose you. I'm pursuing you. I'm coming close today. I pray that we would feel that. Would that change our world, our mind about romance and our sin and what we've done? If we hear shame today, that's not from you. Conviction is good. Conviction says that's wrong. Shame says you're wrong. And yet God says, I chose you. So God, I pray we'd feel that today. We'd believe that in our heart. And as we do, bring your presence, bring it close. Would we have revival? I know that romance is a very practical topic relative to what we normally preach about, but God, it's very spiritual. And so because of that, bring revival into our sexuality, into our life, into our mind. Bring healing, Lord. I pray that we would have the posture of, man, I want my first love back. When we look at you and everything else, God, I pray that you'd be the desire of all nations. Would we long for you? And would that bring us into purity? And you said the pure will see God's face. And so we pray for that, God. As we see you, bring revival in our life. We love you. Bring healing, Lord. Speak to us like only you can. Thank you for what you're doing in our church this month. In Jesus' name, everybody said, amen.